is Jacqueline Kagume, and I'm very pleased on behalf of the Institute of Economic Affairs to welcome you to our webinar today. This is IEA's 14th webinar of 2022, and we are very pleased that you found time to join us and participate in this discussion. So an introduction for you, the IEA, as most of you know, is a public policy think tank, and our mission is basically to inform decision-making in the country through conducting research, policy innovation, and hosting informed debates or policy dialogues, such as the one that we are having here today. And we basically use the outputs of our research and our policy analysis to make some contributions or to propose contributions for policy change. The IEA works across 6 different program areas, starting with our public finance management program. Then we have the Constitution, Law and Economy program. We have trade and development, regulation and competition policy, futures and foresight, and lastly, we have the special program. So broadly, our work is constituted in those thematic lines. And the meeting today that we are having, we've convened a meeting on to discuss election campaign financing and what implications that has on democracy. So this meeting is convened by the CLE program, where I work together with my colleague Leo. Basically, the goal of the CLE program is to monitor the performance of some of the institutions, some of the key institutions that are created by Kenya's constitution, just to check for adherence to minimum constitutional thresholds. And we also apply legal and economic analysis to various policy choices. So as you saw in the notice, I've already mentioned the theme or the main topic for discussion today. So basically, if I could, we have a lineup of 3 main speakers, and my colleague Leo will also speak shortly. But to state very briefly before I introduce our speakers, some of the background is that we are all aware that Kenya is preparing for a general election. That is in the next 70 days or so. I checked, I think it's 70 or 69 days. So this is going to be our 3rd general elections under the 2010 constitution. If we count 2017 as being one election, because we had the subsequent one. But basically, this is going to be our 3rd under the 2010 constitution, and the 7th since the reintroduction of multi-party system in 1992. So obviously, we expect that by now we've had various changes, we've had various reforms that are supposed to strengthen or make our electoral system slightly better. It's for all of us to judge whether those reforms have been useful so far. But we know that Chapter 7 of the Constitution basically spells out what is expected of Kenya's electoral system. It's the chapter on representation, and basically it provides or lays out the foundation for Kenya's electoral system, including stating very specifically some of the principles for a free and fair elections. And that stated, we know that the electoral process is usually a whole cycle, and right now we are just in the pre-election period. And one of the main markers, or one of the major things that marks the pre-election period is obviously election campaigns. And this provides the platforms for all these parties, for all these individuals to lay out or discuss with the citizens what are their party ideals, what will be their policy agenda if elected. So we have the campaign period. And to be able to facilitate these campaigns, obviously and invariably, we have funding being a very important and necessary component of the electoral process. And it's mostly by the access or the availability of funding that parties and individuals are able to publicize what basically will be their ideals, what they'll be proposing as their policy once or if elected. So it's a crucial element. Funding is a crucial element of the campaign period. And it helps to facilitate communication, mobilization. We know what the importance of the funding is. However, despite how crucial an element it is, it's also been established that if unrestricted, the funding can be a way or a means for either corporates or powerful individuals and powerful interests to exert undue influence in the future governance of the state. So the various studies that have been conducted show that campaign financing sometimes has implications for policy capture, and that some of the financial contributions that are made can threaten a fair and democratic decision making, where the individuals, given that you were funded by a certain party, certain corporates, you feel beholden to them afterwards. And so even the form of policies that are implemented thereafter sort of are biased. So the system lacks impartiality. And this is obviously in contrast to the principles that are laid out in Article 81 of Kenya's Constitution. It requires that the electoral system should be free from improper influence and corruption. So that's just basically it. So now, against this background, the necessity for the reality of election campaigns and where we are currently in our election system, and the reality of the importance of funding, we thought that we'd convene this discussion today to discuss these different elements on what election campaign financing means for a democracy. So to do that, we have we are prepared for 3 speakers, as I said before, together with my colleague Leo. So we hope to have a very insightful discussion. We have speakers from the Elections Observation Group. We have, I'll confirm who is the representative, but they had mentioned that they'd be represented by a colleague called Sarah. Then we have Mr. Vincent Kimosop. He's a policy and governance expert who works with the Sovereign Insight. And then we have a speaker from Transparency International. I'm also need to confirm whether they are on the call already. So I'll introduce their topics as we go, but before that, I'll give my colleague Leo some very quick 10 minutes because of time, and then our speakers thereafter will have each 15 to 20 minutes to share their insights on the topics that we've assigned them. So Leo will just add to what I've said and some quick facts or a background to elections campaign financing for 10 minutes, and then we'll go to our main speakers. So Leo.
My name is Leo Kiemboi. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs together with Jackie for the Constitution, Law and Economy program. So I just want to give a very short background on now as an economist using public choice theory to just try and put this into perspective. So first, the reason why the campaign finance regulation exists is because there's a broad recognition that this is a marketplace, and a marketplace has both supply side players, it has demand side players, and it also has a price. And for Kenya, for the case of Kenya, the regulation for the campaign finance is the Campaign Finance Act of 2013. I know most speakers will speak in broader detail about this. And this regulation is seeking to disrupt this market by leveling political terrain or political ground for both parties who have resources and those who are not blessed with, who and those who don't have resources. Then, of course, the scope for this regulation is limited by the right to political freedom, the right of association, the right to property, because these are rights under the Kenyan Constitution. Because somebody can choose, if, for example, I have $1 billion and I want to buy, can apply that whether in politics, whether in any form of activity. So campaign finance is scope for this regulation. That right limits the scope for this regulation. And the reason why most people are justifying the need for campaign finance for this disruption is that most people believe that elective posts are sold to the highest bidder, of which all of us know, given we, like, for example, for the case of Kenya, we've observed Kenyan politics for a very long time, and that seems not to be the case. And then secondly, campaign contributions are essentially the same as bribes. So if you give a billion shillings to candidate X, most people would see that that is the same as a functional bribe. So most economists use the public choice theory to explain this. And in public choice theory, the approach is if you take one action of one player would lead to a specific action from the other side. And so in broader sense, given that I have 10 minutes, that I just wanted to highlight some of the of the studies from outside Kenya that speaks on the impact of campaign financing on democracy. And first, this is my own contention that campaign finances is not only the only factor in determining electoral success. And the other factors, some for me, for example, is the period a candidate has been in politics and eccentricity of the candidate, amongst other issues. In Kenya, narratives, for example, the most common now is that women cannot vie for, even at county level, cannot vie for governor positions. They can only vie for women positions because the constitution has given them that. That is a narrative that is untrue, but is popular in the grassroots. So what I'm saying is that campaign finances is not only the only factor in determining electoral success. So that to put the point across, that it's not the silver bullet. And when I reviewed some of the popular literature around this, so I looked at the paper by Steve Levitt. He's done 3 papers. One of them is the using repeat challenges to estimate the effects of campaign spending on electoral outcomes in the US. And he found out that there is no effect of marginal campaign spending on electoral successes of candidates. So, for example, like if you're vying for a specific house rep seat, and you have like 10, the required finances would be the minimum. Any any additional finances after that minimum would not actually result into electoral success. It's minimal. And then there's some research also by a professor called Jeffrey Milio and Timothy Gross-Close, and also Stephen Levitt. We find that systematic analysis of fortunes of wealthy candidates found no impact between for significant association between electoral or fundraising success and personal wealth. So, in essence, that campaign financing doesn't tell necessarily the whole story for electoral success. And these are from studies over a longer period, on a long term. The Professor Emilio and David Primo wrote a book last year in 2020, evaluating now research over a longer term, whether campaign financing or the moneyed interests have resulted into a trust deficit by public with public institutions, and they found the converse. So it doesn't tell the whole story, but this is one area that that needs more broader discussion like the one we have today. And so I end my presentation at that. So back to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Thanks, Leo, for the quick thoughts and the quick facts. I'd like to, so Leo has added to the background that I had spoken about regarding campaigns financing and some of the literature around it, and the thinking around it from an economist point of view, adding to the legal underpinnings that I spoke about earlier. So we are now going to our guest speakers. So we have 3 speakers, as I had stated. So I don't see, I'm not sure whether Vincent is on the call. Just give me a minute. So I think Vincent has not yet joined the call. In that case, Vincent was supposed to speak about the cost of democracy and funding political parties, but because I see he's not yet joined and he's told me he's joining, I think we will go to the next speaker, and then Vincent will speak after him. So next, we're supposed to discuss campaign financing and the risks for policy capture. I see a representative from ELOG, Marcus. Marcus, would you, are you able to unmute yourself and speak to we had asked ELOG to speak to campaign financing and the risks for policy capture.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I don't know whether I could project.
Yes, sure.
Okay. I don't know how that works. Let me try.
So you can share the screen. There's a button at the top right corner which you can share.
Are you able to see it on the screen?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Let me try again. Just a second. Jack, are you able to see it?
No.
All right.
Maybe
I
you
don't
can.
think I will.
I don't know if you can place it. You can place the presentation. If you can upload it here, then we can project it for you. Place it on the chat box if you can. We have a chat box of this platform, so if you can be able to upload it there, then someone can project it for you.
All right. Let me see. All right. Let me probably just speak. Okay. Yeah, I think to save time. Yeah, to just save time on that. So, first of all, thank you very much for according ELOG this opportunity to be able to share a few insights. and I will be able to share some of the insights on behalf of ELOG and on behalf of our chairperson, that is Anne Ireri. And so, just a few things to start us off. I think we are all aware that the election campaign financing regime came into force in 2013, and subsequently a number of things have happened, and we haven't been able to implement that particular legal regime since that time. So observations that we can quickly adduce to: one is that money has the twin potential, of course, as we all know, to influence and even to alter public choice. In terms of, if you have a lot of it, chances are that you may win an election, which you would have otherwise lost in the first instance if you didn't have the money. But also, money has also the potential to make you emerge as a leader. Otherwise, how do you then reach out to voters if they don't see you, if they don't feel you, to use other words they use out there? Now, but a balance is required. And this is what others have called the egalitarian approach that the Constitution ordains. But you need a balance between helping you emerge as a candidate, as a leader, but also somehow making you allowing yourself to move around, walk around, speak to things around. That is something that is very crucial. So that is what we call that approach that the Constitution ordains. But in other places, in other jurisdictions, the approach is not so much to seek this balance, but also what they have called the libertarian approach, where you're allowed to spend as much as you can, but disclose your sources. In other words, in those jurisdictions, money is considered as a means of freedom of expression. So, but Kenya, so in our case, Kenya sees itself in this other area where we need to seek a balance. And I was glad when you mentioned Article 81. E subsection 2 in terms of free from violence, intimidation, improper influence, or corruption. We know for a fact that unregulated use of money not only leads to improper influence, but also is a good recipe for corruption. And we have seen it in the country. And in light of some of the issues that ELOG has been able to flag out together with their partners, and I'm happy that TI is here, that has been doing a lot of work in this field. So that is one observation I wanted to make. And now we know that the spending limits have been once again suspended. Parliament did suspend them. There was a judicial review where IBC was required to come up with those regulations again, subject them to public participation. And I don't know, within 69 days or 70 days left to this election, what is practically possible. And I've left that question to the last slide to help us speak to some of what is practical in given these circumstances. Now to come back to policy capture, it's a very interesting term to use. What does it mean to speak about policy capture? We've been hearing is about policy capture. All along we hear policy capture. I mean, state capture. But here we spoke about policy capture. What do we really understand by policy capture? And is it different from what they would have called the state capture before? And that is critical. The why of the policy capture, the how of the policy culture and the who of that policy culture. Those are very important. Who is it behind the policy culture? Who and how are they capturing? How and why are they capturing it? It is important to understand those three components in this discussion. So when we speak about policy capture, we speak about instances policies are made at the behest of what they call the strong interest group. The strong interest groups, and they are made at the expense of the common good. They're made at the expense of the common good. In a nutshell, that is what we would want to understand policy capture to mean. In other words, a group of few individuals who are responsible for policy formation, responsible for implementing that policy, and also responsible for enforcing the implementation of that policy when their interests supersedes the interest of the common good, the public. That is when we speak about policy culture in this regard. And that is the context in which I'm using the word policy capture in this statement. And so to answer the question why do they do it? They do it for three reasons. One, money issue. Of course, money, resources. They want to ensure that as much resources are amassed, they are gathered, they are made to grow, and that gives them some sort of influence and power. The second reason why these policy makers or influencers or enforcers do this is because of control. They say he who pays the piper calls the tune. So when you're made so much wealth and so much influence, then you can control. You control what people think, you control how they think, and therefore you control how they do stuff. So that is the second reason as to why you could speak about policy capture in terms of the why capture. The third issue is accountability. This is about it's a moral and an ethical argument where they're saying we don't want to be accountable to anyone apart from ourselves, because these are our interests that we are safeguarding, and to the extent that they are our interests, we are only accountable to ourselves. So we are morally or even ethically justified to do the things that we do, because we are the ones who make the decisions when laws are made, when laws are broken. So that is the other issue. So that addresses the three. If you want to use the word the three-legged stool of policy capture. The why, in terms of accountability, in terms of money or resources, in terms of control, and they do that, and the how, and the how is when they fail to implement some of those policies that are required. In this case, we are speaking about the electoral campaign financing regulations in this instance. So when they fail to do it, and when they do it, they fail to implement it, and even where they implement it, they fail to enforce it. So that is the aspect that I wanted us to probably flag out in this conversation. So that is number one. So that is what they do. And in a context of our country, where the organizing philosophy for our candidates is how to beat the law. That is the organizing principle, the organizing philosophy of those who capture policy framework in the country. how can we beat the law? Well, let us make it. Let us make the policy. Let us even implement it. Let us even attempt to enforce it. But the organizing, the overriding, the hidden agenda, philosophy behind this, how then do we beat the system? How do we beat the law? It's not so much how to comply with the law. And if they can circumvent the law or the policy to get elected or to stay elected without getting caught, they will do it. So that is the organizing principle. So that is the how. And the who is, in this case, I would just stick to Parliament and the IEBC, because again, we are dealing with Parliament as a role to play in the electoral campaign financing regime, but also the IEBC as a role to play. So those two critical stakeholders are the who in this particular instance. And Parliament, we know as for the last 2013, 2017, and possibly 2022 are frustrated the efforts. 2013, they conveniently passed the law after the general election. In 2017 and 2022, of course, entirety, and therefore for a third successive time, we are likely to conduct these elections without any oversight on funding and on spending. So this is so the who therefore is the I've singled out those two particular stakeholders, which is a major issue. So if you look at it's a vicious cycle in terms. So the policy capture could be seen in terms of as a vicious cycle where you pay for political or judicial protection to remain untouchable. We've had instances where some of these guys attempt to bribe their way out of problems. Like I've said, the organizing principle, the organizing philosophy is always not so much to comply with the law, but to beat it. And to beat it also includes even paying for judicial protection. Like I've said, the second, in terms of this vicious cycle, amazing wealth through corruption and illicit money acquisition. So we have money illicitly acquired, wealth that is obtained illegally, and that which then gives you, like I've said, the control with money. That now addresses the why. So why we have control, money, and accountability. So you amass so much wealth, you amass so much wealth out of illicit money, therefore you can pay for anything that you want to pay. Then the third issue is about political patronage and what we've called here judicial capture, which then allows you to bribe the system. So the judicial capture is when you remain untouchable. You remain untouchable to the extent that you are feared. Your name is feared because you can buy the judges, you can threaten them, and nothing happens to you. So that is the other aspect that I wanted to flag out, and as well as political patronage, because we are heavily a multi-party democracy, and our governments are formed out of a political party, so that you manage political party issues because of party patronage. The third issue is relating to this policy capture in terms of a cycle is voter bribery and fundraisers for you to buy support from potential voters. And of course, even from ELOG point of view, we've had our long-term observers in the field, and part of the emerging issues we have obtained is growing trend of voter bribery, as well as attempts to buy voters. through either contacting Arambes, even when we know it is illegal in our country. We know that the voter bribery are now becoming in some softer ways in terms of food. You give food here and there. You give, lesos there. You say you are branding, things like that. So we know that there are those attempts. So because of the wealth that you have amassed, because of the illicit money that you have, you're able to do these things and get away with it. Now, the net effect of that is the election of leaders with no integrity into the political office. So that is the net effect. So you have got is a cycle. It continues. You have election of leaders with no political integrity into office. They pave their way out of problems to remain untouchable. They continue amassing their wealth through corruption and illicit money. They continue to to bribe the system, political patronage. They continue to bribe voters, to continue to buy their support, and the same people get re-elected. So that is where we are in terms of that vicious cycle that threatens our nascent democracy. Now, I have just last two issues I want to speak to. We are at maybe 69 days to the election. What are some of the opportunities that are there? We know that the law mandates the IEBC to put in place guidelines to cap election spending limits for candidates as well as political parties. What are some of the possible avenues that we could do? We have identified a number of them, but I'll just single out 3 or 4 as I conclude. One is the judicial intervention, as was seen early last month or sometimes last month, where the courts have already pronounced themselves in this issue and declared that the IEBC was within their mandate to gazette those limits, but have to conduct public participation in the framing of those regulations. So again, just calling the IEBC to move with steps to be able to. We are now 2 days after the official campaign period. The IEBC should tell us whether they have enough time between now and 6th of August to be able to use that regime. The second issue I would like to point out is we could seek a judicial intervention. I don't know how that will sit, but an attempt at judicial intervention to compel candidates and political parties to make public donations that don't require regulations or guidelines. That is, attempt at judicial intervention to compel candidates and other parties to make public campaign donations and spending. So we could even ask courts to just compel them to do so, if it's possible. But also, there are some parts of the election campaign financing that do not require regulations or guidelines. So those ones can be actually implemented. But the other thing I wanted to speak to in terms of enlisting citizen vetting of political party or candidates to promote transparency and accountability in the use of resources and the campaigning, the use of big money. Some of these things are happening. We know some estates where citizen vetting is happening. We know of civil society organizations. We know the other day TI, together with other organizations, I think they call themselves the Integrity Alliance, they were able to speak to some of these issues. So just speaking out, vetting some of these guys, social vetting is a critical step towards just bringing consciousness in terms of this issue. Lastly, we just, as civil society organizations and other actors, maybe we just step up our voter education campaigns on the adverse effect of unregulated use of money in elections and how that affects the outcome of this election. I want to start from there and back to you, Jackie.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Marcus from ELOG. We wish we could have seen your presentation, but all the same, very insightful. I think all our participants have noted a thing or two, and we'll come back to you during plenary with some more clarifications. And from here, I'd request my next couple of speakers to kindly have on their videos so that our participants can be able to just better presentation so that our participants can better interact with the presentation. So if possible, kindly have your video on for our next speakers and also during plenary. And that said, thanks a lot, Marcus, and ELOG. We'll come back to you. So now we go to Vincent. The next presenter should be Mr. Vincent. As I had mentioned earlier, he's a Christian government and what also the insight. And we had requested him to talk to us about thoughts on the cost of democracy. Funding in Kenya. The ordinary moment, there might I would like to bring things to us.
Hi, Jackie, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
I'm actually joining you people from Eldoret, so if I have a connection issue, kindly bear with me. I don't know why I'm not able to put my video on or a camera on. Clicking on it severally, but it's not working. So if I can have your blessing to proceed on, without putting my video on so that I can also save on time. Okay, when I was invited to speak on this panel, my topic was the cost of democracy, that is in funding political parties in Kenya. Of course, I haven't heard what my previous presenters have said, so if I repeat something, please don't worry, it will be an issue of emphasis. But also, we know the legal framework, the journey that the country has traveled as far as financing of political parties is concerned. If you look at all major corruption scandals in this country, they can all be traced to political financing. So Goldenberg around the 1992 elections, you have the land issue of that was meant to finance the elections around 97. Karura land issue, if you look at the issue of Anglo leasing, all has to do with the 2002 elections. If you look at the other scandals, even which we've had after the elections, KEMSA, something to do with the 2017 elections, all of them, because we have made, as much as the country has made progress in terms of strengthening legal frameworks, our political terrain in terms of financing our politics, one of the things that has happened is that it has innovated to be in line with, to keep with the times. So, and I can assure you, even the next scandals that we will have after the 2022 elections, if you do a proper analysis, they have something to do with the 2022 elections. What happens when countries normally improve in terms of their sophistication, strengthening of their institutions, corruption also mutates and it takes a different form. At the initial stages, you have issues to do with bribery, you have issues to do with grand corruption, and also the final part is what you call looting. When it becomes difficult, when you strengthen systems, you have to give an accountability while you are withdrawing a lot of money. What happens usually, corruption in terms of which is related to campaign financing, moves towards what you call budgeted or what we normally call as in what you call you have corruption that is planned for. So projects are in manifestos, agendas of political parties, not because they are really the things that are meant to transform or make the difference that the people desire, but it is part of the strategies of actually recouping what people invested in the elections. And this does not matter on both sides of the divide. If you take a keen study from 2013 to 2017 to this period, you will realize that it's the same across the divide. So, so corruption moves to infrastructural related projects. So you have these massive investments, the dams, the roads, but when you look at the costs of per kilometer, when you do the cost value for money, you actually can trace back that all these have something to do with campaign financing. So we have made progress. Yes, today some of the political parties are able to access public resources based on the Political Parties Act that established the Political Parties Fund. But not all the parties get this. One of the mistakes that we've made, and I was part of this around 2007, when we were doing the Political Parties Act, we made access to the Political Parties Fund based on number of seats that a party or representation in parliament. I think there is need for us to change that towards ensuring that access to political parties fund should be based on membership, so that our political parties, therefore, are obligated to be able to demonstrate what they are doing, to be able to engage the members of the public, and then with a proper role that can be audited and accessed. So just coming to the topic of the day on really the cost. So yes, we have the increase in terms of the amount of money that is allocated to the political parties fund, but the problem is that that money is not accessed by many parties. And some of those parties which have been there for long, they have lived the test of the time. They are able to speak to constituencies that the others, big parties that are based mainly at times because they have ethnic backings. These other parties are not able to access that. So that's something that needs to be addressed. Because democracy is the majority having their way, but also the minority having their say, so that these parties continue to be articulate and aggregate the issues of those segments in society that are not part of the mainstream. The other thing that I would also want to point out in terms of the costs to our democracy is that when parties are individual based, that today when you look at some of the major formation, if you remove their party leader, there is no party. So getting parties to then move towards an institutionalized approach rather than a personality-based parties. The other thing I would also want to highlight is that the challenge with that is that everybody sings to the tune of the party leader, even though discipline is important, but alternative voices. And a good place to see is how the nominations worked. At times, it's not even the person who is popular on the ground, but the person who is very closer to the party leader. And that stifles the voice and what democracy should be, which is giving voices to the majority. I also want to point out that when you go to the ground, our political parties, specifically the Campaign Financing Act, it's very hard to be implemented because elections are very expensive. I am speaking while on the ground and supporting some of the technically managing some of the campaigns, and I can assure you, from posters to billboards to flyers to financing the meetings, all these at times are becoming so much expensive. I remember talking to one of the candidates who is running for a position of governor, and they spend not less than 200,000 per day. And when you ask yourself, is it really worth looking at the salaries that they will get? And you can see clearly that people will have other ways and that have to recover their investment. And it's good to have these conversations, but I challenge as a civil society, let us stop the conversation in the boardrooms and really come and see the realities on the ground. Because I was in a meeting last week. It was discussing really a county and how they plan to address the issues from an economic point of view. And after the meeting, you see people who are young, unemployed, young people who are drunk, you see women, and you can see poverty. And eventually people say, I will say, use it in Swahili, wezi kutuacha hivyo. And those are real issues that when we are talking about campaign financing architecture, when you're talking about getting politics that gives voices and opportunities to different people, some of these realities stifle the opportunities for voices that represent the people effectively to participate. Because if you don't have money, you are the terrain changes. Now, is there hope? I would be able to say that there is hope. One is that our institutions are maturing. You can see the electoral body is slowly taking its place. The registrar of the political parties, even I don't think there's any election that the registrar of political parties has been permanent, open, like the one of 2022. You're also seeing political parties, even though the nominations were not perfect, but at least there was something towards that. And I think in future, one of the things that needs to be done is to make the bold decisions, to make the IEBC manage the nominations of these parties, because it's a publicly funded body, so that then on one day have these parties bring their registers, and people can vote, have their nominations done. So there is hope in terms of seeing the maturation of our institutions. Some of these parties publish their books of accounts in the dailies. Whether they represent the true position and is another thing, because when you look at the consensus across the political divide to frustrate the coming into effect of the Campaign Financing Act through which requires only a gazette notice than the regulations, it tells you clearly that there is consensus among the political elite. It's not something they would want to see happen, because when you really get to see who is financing these parties, then you're able to understand the people who are controlling businesses, particularly the big business within the political economy. So those are the things I just wanted to highlight in terms of the things that we have to speak to, the realities we have to confront. If campaign financing, if our democracy in terms of getting the voices of the people represented when we go to the ballot, getting the prominence and the position they would want, because of what the frustrations, the challenges that comes to really financing and running a campaign. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I promised a very insightful discussion at the beginning, and I think we are fulfilling that. So you've made some profound statements there, quite a bit, starting with and you mentioned something to do with all major scandals being linking back to elections campaign financing, and to be post-election corruption. So you said that it has a link to all, both from bribery to grand corruption. To speak to corruption. This is Derek from Transparency International. This is their area, it's their forte. And I know even the corruption perceptions index that they have, part of those indicators are constituted. Some of them speak to the level of openness in elections campaign financing, and I think he'll be able to elaborate if that is true or not. But so I'll just invite Derek. Derek, if you have a presentation, kindly project it, and then also, if you can, I request you to have the video on. So you're welcome. You have your 20 minutes.
All right. Hi, Jackie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I'm trying to turn on my video. Huh. Can you see me?
Yes.
All right. Unfortunately, I don't have a presentation, but I have some elaborate notes I will make reference to. And as you said, of course, this is something that we have been working on for quite a while. I don't know if you can hear me. My internet is weak. Hello, Jackie, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right. So the problem with the hello?
I think you can proceed. Hello, I think you can proceed.
Okay. The problem with coming in last is that my colleagues have already mentioned a lot of things that I wanted to say, but I think nonetheless I'll just mention some of them. Leo started by he made a presentation, and one of the things that he said was that there was no correlation, at least in the long term, between money and success in political office. Marcus said something different, and from our findings as TI Kenya and the work that we've done locally and the research that we've done, we find a very strong correlation between the amount of money dispensed during campaigns and success in elective office. So there's that at least in our local politics, and also the fact that money has a potential to influence decision making. So that being said, allow me just to give some background on campaign financing. And the point that I'm trying to make in giving this background is the system on campaign financing has always been designed to fail. And why do I say this? Contrary to popular belief, campaign finance regulations did not begin with the 2010 constitution. The first attempt Kenya had at regulating how much money was used in campaigns was in 1979. And an amendment was passed to the then electoral law that limited candidates to spending 40,000 shillings during elections, and that was for the members of parliament elections. Actually, the first proposal that was tabled by Paul Ngei then was 20,000 shillings, but the Attorney General felt that money was too little, and he pushed for it to be revised to 40,000 shillings. We got into elections with a campaign regulatory framework that limited, that put the limit to 40,000 shillings. However, the catch was this. The regulations would only kick off after the primaries. So the 40,000 shillings was supposed to be applied after the primaries, but the catch was that at that time, Kenya was a one-party state. So after the primaries, there were no elections. Because it was only Kano. So the act intended to start after the Kano primaries, but it was only a one-party state, so nothing happened. Immediately after the primaries, on the day of elections, all those who had won were declared winners. So there was no, it was a legislation that was drafted to fail. It was not effective. Some years later, around 1997, that legislation was repealed. That section was repealed. And so in even the first multi-party elections, there was no, I think people just forgot about it. When we went into the next multi-party elections, it was repealed because at that time, it was feasible for regulation to happen after the nominations. But 1997 happened, nothing. And all the way to 2010, we did not have any regulations in place. But during the constitution making process, all the reports involved, all the constitutional documents made reference to the impact of money in our democracy, and made several recommendations that the electoral management body, that is the IBC or the ECK then, to be in charge of regulation of campaigns financing. So the Kriegler report, the Waki report, election observer reports, all made that recommendations. And the first constitutional draft that we have in 2005, the Yashpal draft, also had a provision on proposing IBC, the electoral management body then, to regulate financing. But when that went to Parliament, Parliament removed that provision, and in the final draft constitution that we had, which we voted for in 2005, did not have that provision. Then, but that constitution did not pass anyway. But come 2010, the Committee of Experts introduced a clause that gave IBC power to regulate campaign financing. The draft went back to Parliament. The Parliamentary Committee on Constitutional Reforms removed that provision and sent the draft back to the Committee of Experts. But the Committee of Experts insisted that it had to be there. And in the final draft that we voted for in 2010, that clause was reintroduced under Article 84, which essentially gave IBC power to regulate campaign financing. But the Act, the Constitution also gave Parliament the power to regulate, to pass laws that would give life to various electoral provisions. So 2010, we have a constitution, Article 84 says that IBC should regulate. And we got into immediately one of the acts that Parliament tried to pass then. One of the bills was a bill on campaign financing. But by the time elections the 2010 elections arrived, that bill was not passed. So we got into the 2013 elections with a constitutional provision, but without an act or detailed provisions on how that is going to be experienced. So the 2010 elections happened, 2013 elections, no form of campaign financing. The new parliament gets into place, and the fact, one of the first acts that they passed was the act that we have now, Election Campaign Financing Act. The new parliament was sworn in, I think it was around March, if I'm not wrong. By November, they already had the act in place. So the 2013 act was supposed to regulate future campaigns. So we got into the next election. We have the constitution, we have an act, so we will have some regulations in place. But now the act had a provision requiring IBC to draft regulations, submit the regulations to Parliament for approval, which is very weird because essentially Parliament is regulating itself. So IBC just does that in 2016, drafts regulations, submits to Parliament. Parliament rejects those regulations for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it is not, that the regulations are unconstitutional, they are not practical, the timelines are limited, and so many reasons. So again, Parliament has rejected the regulations. We still have the Act, we still have the Constitution, but for some reason, there's no form of regulation happening. And shortly after rejecting the regulations, Parliament repeals the entire Act. It passes a provision under Section 1A that suspends the entire Act for operation during the 2017 elections. So even if the regulations came into place, the Act was suspended. So we get into the 2017 elections without any form of regulations. But after the elections, the suspension clause expires. So immediately after the election, the act is alive again. And now we, in the civil society, are hopeful we will at least have something in the 2022 general elections. So come the 2022 elections that we are waiting for, last year, IBC again drafts regulation, submit them to Parliament for approval. Parliament rejects them again. For a variety of more or less the same reasons they did in 2017. So right now we are in a space where we are not sure whether there will be any form of regulations because of Parliament's rejection of the regulations. And I think you can now see my point that every form of regulations on campaign financing has been designed to fail. The first regime regulation after nominations for one-party states doesn't work. This second regime, Parliament embedding itself into the approval process, where it can simply wake up and say, we do not like these regulations for whichever reasons, and we will not have. So that is the situation we stand with that now. Jackie, you asked me to talk about the impact of lack of campaign financing in post-election corruption. And of course, campaign financing is tied to elections, and the fact that we don't have it also has to corruption. The fact that we don't have it also has an impact on corruption. I've listed around 8 areas which how the lack of financing can impact. The first is on entrepreneurship. We have seen a rise of entrepreneurship in the last decade, especially with the Jubilee governments. That we believe is somehow tied to the lack of a proper financing of elections. Campaign financiers, of course, the cost of elections are very expensive and campaigns are very expensive, and clearly a lot of candidates cannot afford that amount of money from their own sources, and let me say from their own legitimate sources. So they tend to look out to campaign financiers, especially at the presidential level, where you're looking at billions of shillings. Recently, the IBC proposed a cap of 4 billion shillings for elections of the president. And it's clear that that money won't come from a single individual. So there is a group of campaign financiers who are not interested in political office, but the business opportunities that come out of government. And some analysts, some people have been argue that the people who supported the Jubilee government, the financiers of the Jubilee government, were mostly from the construction industry, the entrepreneurs, and that is why the Jubilee government seems to have been focused more on infrastructural development, because the people who benefit are just those people who get tenders, people in the construction business, as compared to Kibaki era, which was believed to have been financed by bankers. And so for bankers to reap benefit, the masses had to be economically will now have a say in the government projects, and we'll see a lot of entrepreneurship, and there will never be logical or fair opportunities for others to get into the business. Number 2 is the increase in money laundering. Recently, Matiang'i, our CS Interior, made some comments over his concerns that a lot of wash guys were getting into politics, and going by the profile of just some of the individuals who seem interested in public office, we clearly see that. And if wash and money laundering is used to finance campaigns, then those individuals get a level of protection, and money laundering becomes a very lucrative field. So these individuals might not have an interest in public office, but they are financing just to get a level of protection to ensure that their legitimate businesses do not get a lot of hit. So that is the other thing that we are foreseeing, more and more guys getting into money laundering and illicit financial flows. Then number 3 is the eroding quality of leadership that that could be an impact of unregulated campaign financing. Of course, these individuals who, the evolution, the natural evolution of cartel leaders and people with questionable integrity. If you look at the story of Pablo Escobar, at one point was interested in political office. If you look at people like Trump in Venezuela, also the former vice president was a drug kingpin. And even locally, we know them. I just don't want to to mention their names, but we know that a lot of these individuals who are involved in crime and organized crime eventually desire public office. And some of them, a good number of them are successful. So when we have these individuals in place, the quality of the leaders that we have our country is seriously eroded, and and it just weakens our value system and perpetuates corruption. If India's parliament, for instance, 50% of India's parliament have cases, either criminal or corruption cases. And Matiang'i also mentioned that we are likely to have 50% of our elected leaders being criminal. So what does that show about the quality of our leadership? Just to give some two examples, you remember the case recently, an MCA aspirant from Nakuru was arrested for mobile fraud, all this M-Pesa fraud that we have been exposed to. So you can imagine if he was not discovered, assuming he's found guilty, and just where the money is coming from. Last election in 2017, there was a candidate, there was actually an MCA called Stephen Muradhi Kambi, who was facing charges of robbery with violence, murder, and rape while sitting as an MCA. So you can just see the quality of leaders that we have. Number four is, of course, obviously, the recouping the cost, the need for these leaders to recoup these candidates to recoup the cost, and the cost of campaigns are very expensive. According to a report done by the National NIMD and the Westminster Foundation of Democracy, to become an MP in this country, you have to use 2 years of your salary just in campaigns, and that is just in campaigns, and that is a very conservative estimate because there are so many related costs. There are issues with the legal disputes. You need to hire lawyers to sort your legal disputes. I see these days politicians are also buying media space. We've seen it on especially on Citizen TV. I've seen, and we know how expensive those of us who engage with media just to get a media slot to talk about the work that we are doing. We see voters demanding for bribes. We've seen these MPs in harambes and funerals. And then given that Kenya is always in a constant election phase, so that immediately after elections, immediately after elections, we begin campaigns, and campaigns only stop on the day of elections. So given that, there's obviously the need for these individuals to recoup the costs. And how do they do that? One, it's either through corruption, which I think we have emphasized a lot, or two, through wages. And I think we've seen a lot of concerted efforts by certain reasons why the drive is too strong. It's just for them to be able to recoup some of the costs that they spend during campaigns. And number five is a weakened representation and perpetuating discrimination. The more unrated financing is, the more expensive it becomes. And that means that the people who don't have the money but are desirous of ownership get locked out. We've seen a lot of people who have been handed party tickets, fit the profile of wealthy, established politicians. So the young man who believes they are a leader and only has 100,000 shillings to campaign, statistically they have a very less chance of them getting into office. There's a country, I forgot, I think it's Sweden, where the cap is, I think, 10,000 euros. So with that amount of money, and it's very strict on how the money is spent. If for instance, we say in Kenya, put a cap on 200,000 shillings to vie as an MCA, then it will be very easy for a lot of people to mobilize those resources and get an opportunity to be leaders in this country. And then, of course, the other thing, the number 6 is another impact is weakened institutions. So because the politicians do not want to be regulated, then it will be important for them to weaken some of these institutions. They weaken IPC so that it is not able to regulate, weaken ESCC so it's not able to investigate sources of funding, whether it is illicit money, financial sources or corruption proceeds. Weaken ESCC, weaken the Financial Reporting Center so that it is unable to track money flows. Weaken the Asset Recovery Agency so that they cannot investigate and recover some of these funds. You remember there was a gentleman who was arrested with 200 million, I think, in JKIA. Weaken the courts so that they are not able to adjudicate such issues on time. We also weaken the moral fabric of citizens so that they are not able to raise pertinent questions, and also weaken the churches so that when you make the churches and religious institutions beneficiaries of unregulated campaign financing, if politicians keep on giving donations to church, then you weaken those institutions, and we've seen that. So that is the other thing you can see. Then lastly, as Vincent had mentioned, is this just looking at the opportunities, and grand corruption has always been tied to elections. And he mentioned about the Goldenberg scandal that was believed to support the 92 and 97 elections. There's the Anglo-Leasing scandal of 2007 elections, NYS and Eurobond supporting the 2017 elections. So because it is unregulated, then it puts impotence on people in government to get into grand corruption to finance very expensive elections, especially the general elections. So this is the other thing that we are likely to see every time elections come, and we are likely to see a lot of cases on grand corruption happening. So how does the future look like? I take a very I'm not very optimistic, even though I work in this field a lot. I think where I sit now, it looks very bleak. One, we are not likely to see any form of finance regulation of campaign financing during these elections, unless those institutions Marcus mentioned just come together and have a proper and genuine conversation and work plan, so that we see sources of campaign financing, because they don't have to be regulated. We know that if you do money laundering, whether or not it goes into the election, that is illegal. So if we have those discussions in place, then we are likely to have something. But there's obviously no political political goodwilling. Then also, the other thing that we can rescue in future is try as much as possible to strengthen our institutions, because there's too much focus on campaign financing on the on IEBC. Too much focus on campaign financing is on IEBC. But there are these other institutions which also play a very crucial role, especially in terms of inflows and sources. And I've already mentioned them, the FRC, ARA, and ESCC. So we really need to strengthen those institutions. Then lastly is the people. There's obviously a supply and demand side, and a huge amount of the demand side comes from the citizens. There's a politician who has been saying, has been telling citizens, voters, mwende mkule kwa ule, lakini kura ni kwangu. So because citizens also demand, then there's also the pressure to look for this funding. But I think in conclusion, I think if we strengthen these other institutions to block, to have a very strict regulations, you see, it doesn't matter whether you have billion shillings. If we have a very strong regulatory framework which compels you to disclose how much you are spending, then and also puts a cap, then candidates will not be able to overspend, and I think that is very important for us. Thank you very much, Jackie. Back to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Derek. That was equally. I had the correct selection of the institutions. I hope I'm still visible because I see I'm alerted that I have bad network, but I hope I'm still audible and visible. So I'd like to thank very sincerely all our three speakers. To try and attempt a very brief recap, we started with the presentation from Marcus of ELOG, where we had asked him to share with us the thoughts on campaign financing and the risks for policy capture. And he started by defining in their understanding what it entails. He gave us the whys of policy capture, the who, speaking about the institutions, it's been emphasized here, who would be responsible to oversee and prevent that. That's Parliament, IEBC. He spoke to us about how it's the capture ends up being a vicious cycle, and it's come out in the other speakers' presentations. And he emphasized that the net effect of that would be an election of leaders who have no integrity. Again, this has been emphasized. But he also tried to say what we can do in ELOG's perspective. So do we still have any avenues or what could be done? He said there is still some sort of, he was a bit more optimistic than Derek in his conclusion, because he talked about the avenues for the IEBC guide, judicial intervention, requiring disclosures of the parts that can allow for that. He talked about social vetting, responsibility by the voter, the electorate themselves. So we can do some sort of social vetting to prevent some of these candidates from getting into office. And then voter education, he emphasized on that being a possible avenue to cap some of the adverse effects. And I don't know whether it's still too late. It's too late now, but in our own small spaces, in our own discussions, we can use some of these proposals. Then we had the next presentation from Vincent Kimoso, and he basically put into perspective the cost of democracy and looking at funding of political parties. He obviously, or all major scandals have been linked to elections. And then he said that we need to get parties to move towards a sort of institutionalized approach, as opposed to where the kind of parties that we have now that are centered on an individual or personality centered or personality based. Maybe we could explore in more discussion what it would mean to have parties that are anchored more on ideals and on more certain policy agenda as opposed to what we have now. Something interesting that he said was, which is from his experience, that Governor mentioned that he requires at least 200,000 per day. I don't know for how long. So it's 200,000 per day from when until when? Because I think Derek from the WFD study that was conducted, it seems that from the reality on the ground and this study finds, or 2 years of salaries, very conservative estimate for the expenditure. And so maybe I think we might also try to see, so what would be the incentive of spending this much money? We're not going to be able to recoup it. So that again makes the direct link between campaign financing and the likelihood for undue influence in future. And then, is there hope? He was also slightly optimistic. He talked about the fact that our institutions are maturing, and we could emphasize on hope for more accountability by political parties, and concluded his presentation. Then lastly, we've had the final presentation that we've had from TI, and Derek took us through a bit of history on elections campaign financing, right from Ngei's time. And a key thing that he emphasized was that seemingly our campaign financing regulation, or the entire system, seems to have been is always designed to fail. And for that reason, he holds the view that it's unlikely that we will have any positive outcomes, or there's the likelihood of any implementation of proper campaign financing regulation going forward. He emphasized the obvious conflict of interest between members of parliament and them having to regulate themselves, because, as again, we've been shown by all our speakers, how much they're able to spend and how much influence, or how much that is able to buy them going forward. So Derek spoke about the implications for corruption. He's given us the 8 pointers, which I will not repeat in full, but talked about entrepreneurship, an increase in money laundering, the very obvious thing that we've been seeing, that is the eroded quality of our leadership, the weakened representation, weakened institutions, and he's concluded his presentation with a future outlook that we are unlikely to have campaign finance regulation anytime in the near future. But we could try to strengthen different institutions, again, echoing what Vincent had said. And he also made an important point that it's a two-way street. The effects that we are talking about on corruption, it's because there is a demand for it. So there's a supply and demand to this corruption related to campaign financing. And so the electorate, as well as our leaders, everyone has a responsibility in that case. So with that, we've concluded the main presentations, and I know we have some questions. I will now invite anyone who would like to ask any of our speakers, as well as my colleague Leo, who had spoken earlier. So if anyone has any question, kindly let me see your hand. Please raise your hand. I'll allow you to ask the question. As I look at the chat box. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. I'll allow you to unmute and speak. So I see the first, there's Ken Jackie here on the chat box, who had asked what is ELOG and the civil society is doing on this subject matter. And then, yeah, so as we prepare for other questions, maybe Marcus can respond to that. Is there any specific initiative you may be doing as the elections observation group in response to this. And I know we also have other CSO groups on this call. So if anyone has any specific actions that they might be doing that to address some of the challenges we've spoken about today, please feel free to raise your hand.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Just a quick one. I think in terms of social, first of all, even to host some of these discussions like we're having, to just create awareness on the use of money and its potential to lock out good candidates or good leaders out there is one aspect of doing it. But the other thing I wanted to say is that a number of civil society organizations that went to court to compel the IEBC to ensure that money is regulated, even though we never obtained that wish outrightly, but at least we were given some guidance that IEBC was within its power to do that, and also further asked that the regulations be done afresh and be subjected to public participation. To that extent, that we are using judicial process, judicial intervention, public interest litigation is something we can be proud of. So public interest litigation is our way out. Social vetting that is being carried out and championed by civil society organizations. Ourselves as an observation group, our work would be to deploy monitors, see how money is being used to enhance or disenfranchise people. That report could be used for policy or legal review processes. So that is among the things we are doing as part of ELOG, but also as part of the larger civil society organization platform. Jack, you'd allow me to step out because I'm walking into another meeting, but I've left my colleague, Sarah, who is here. So should there be any other further questions, Sarah can be able to attend. And it was a pleasure to see you after many, many, many years.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Marcus. I'll get in touch with you after this as a follow-up. So thanks a lot. We proceed. Does anyone have any other question? I do not see any hands yet. Would anyone like to ask any of our speakers a question? Well, as you think about your question, I think I have one that I'd like for all our speakers to respond to. Just a simple one, a very simple one. In your views, how would an ideal funding, campaign financing or campaign funding model look like? What are some of the quick things that you would think would be important if we were to regulate and for it to work optimally? How would an ideal campaign financing system look like? And I'll start with you, Derek. Just some quick thoughts.
Okay, Jackie, I was still writing my notes. But for me, I think the first thing is to remove Parliament entirely from the regulatory system. And obviously this has been one of our greatest undoing, the fact that Parliament gets to decide how to regulate itself. Just to give an example, which will also serve as a perspective, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission is mandated to determine the salaries of all public servants and state officers. There was a time, the first time SRC published regulations on salaries, Parliament rejected them. And CSOs went to court, and the argument was that no, Parliament should not have any in determining their own salaries. And the court actually agreed with the petitioners and declared that the decision of SRC is final as long as it has done public participation and it is a scientific process, then nothing can be done. And since then, even though Parliament has been twisting SRC in other ways, as the moment SRC determines this is the salary scale, then that is it. Ideally for me, that is what would look as canon. Okay, halfway to canon, that we have IBC having functional independence to be able to regulate campaign financing, both in terms of sources, how it is managed, expenditure, and reporting. That is number one. Number two is we need to have a proper oversight mechanism on how monies are being used, so that any reports on campaign financing by candidates and contestants are accurate, verifiable, and credible. And for this, we need everyone to monitor the campaigns, including IBC, SEC, civil societies, the public, to monitor the campaigns, so that everyone going on a campaign trail knows that they are being monitored. And then secondly, we need to have the Auditor General auditing the reports that have been submitted by these candidates, and doing a very proper audit. That is in the law, but there have been efforts to remove the Auditor General from auditing the reports. And because now we don't have these regulations in place, then it hasn't been done. And even if we had, then if I was a candidate and I only declare I'll spend 10% of my income to the Auditor General, who audits and find them reported well enough, then we will still have a problem. So we need both an audit system and an oversight system. Jackie?
Great, thank you, thanks a lot. Vincent, what are your thoughts? I don't know whether, I think he's not on the call anymore. Okay, so Leo?
Yeah, so for me, first, I think just what is consistent in the law is that for those political parties that received public funds must be audited by the Auditor General. However, somebody using private resources, that stretching Auditor General's function over them is an overstretch. It is actually creating law besides what the Constitution has created. Number two is that we need to distinguish issues. Like now, there's public funds stolen from government of Kenya, and there's, for example, other proceeds from private criminal, like criminal activity in the private sector. It could be anything from selling any corrupt activity. We need to distinguish corruption and campaign financing, because ideally, most of these, if a government official steals, for example, 2 billion, they're not going to use, if they're going, for example, to a certain county to go for a gubernatorial position, they're not going to use 2 billion to buy that, if it's logistics, if it's whatever, any form of what is bought during campaign time, they're likely to use 10% or less. So let's not minimize anti-corruption drive to a single issue of campaign financing. Ideally, for me, what I think is that law enforcement objectives to stop crime, to stop misuse of public funds, to stop all those criminal activities, including those that happen outside, even in the private sector, not just within the public sector, should be separated from the campaign financing. And campaign financing is not, ideally, it's not something that, for me, I'll say defines electoral success in Kenya, because there are candidates. I know from wide reporting that there are candidates, for example, like the lady from Bomet, like she's called Toto, nicknamed Toto. That lady will not be in that position if people say campaign financing defines electoral success as it is gospel truth. Neighboring county, there was a cabinet secretary, one of the most influential people in this country. But again, the public do formalize those harambes, undertook those harambes in the rallies. So for me, essentially, looking at literature, looking at the research done by professors Stephen Levitt, University of Chicago, Jeffrey Milio, and even just literature, context of literature within the continent. I'm agnostic that would be saying campaign financing explains electoral success. What I know is that incumbents, that is true about public resources, is that incumbents refuse to hand over power peacefully, and therefore connive with state agencies to, and this has happened in Kenya ever since Kenya went into a multi-party. No incumbent has ever lost an election. Connive with state agencies, and there are very good examples, especially the one that I had somebody speaking about, the Kriegler report and the Waki report. Connive with state agencies to use public resources, and public resources could be human resource. It's not just a financial cash directly, human resource and all other powers of everything that pertains to the statecraft to be able to push, to go through and take power. So we need to distinguish. For me, to say campaign financing and looking at literature, using public choice, and because even, for example, a very good example, there's a court case, I don't want to speak about specifics. Somebody declared, used 400 million. It was contribution from a specific number of friends. But in that contribution list, there were no like things such as specific identities, including KRA IDs, to be able to pin down that these resources came from specific people. So it's a rule. It's a vein. It's a rule because we expect the same IBC that cannot give us a verified register as of today to be able to give us a very verified pool of data of campaign finances from different accounts of different candidates across the country. I don't think so.
Okay, so Leo takes a slightly different view from most of our panel. So you're saying that you do not think that campaign financing determines election success, and that there are obviously other underlying factors which I think we all agree on. That's obviously corruption. We have a greater corruption problem. It's not always linked, but the thing that I hear the rest of the panel speaking about and emphasizing is that there is actually, we're not saying that it is the only driver for post-election corruption or the only driver for corruption, but that there is actually a link. It is true that there are studies showing that that campaign financing does not 100% influence election outcomes and subsequent processes, but we also do have quite a bit of evidence to the contrary, that actually there is a link, there is indeed a link between elections campaign financing and some level of corruption, and also policy capture can be influenced to that. So there are no one is, I believe it's a discussion and no one is wrong, because we actually have evidence and literature pointing to both facts. But what we could do is to try and see that in the way that funding can influence what can be done to the regulation to make sure that we have better controls, because to some extent it is true, and even as you point out, the Bomet lady and the other independent candidates, I remember the candidate from Meru in the previous election, True, not all candidates are elected because they are able to marshal a massive amount of resources. It's true, but in most cases, these are outliers in my perspective. Mostly, you do have to have a significant amount of resources to be able to pull those elections. It's not always the case, and what is optimal or optimum should be is what we can interrogate further, but we do have some outliers in this case. I see we are very much out of time because we had promised to finish this by 12:50. It's now 12:52. So I'll ask, I do not see any hand. I don't know if anyone would like to say or to ask anything. Okay, I see some two more questions. So Stephen asks, to TI, transparency of campaign financing will continue to be an issue in our country. He calls it our lovely country. However bleak, as you say, what do you propose as a way forward? So Derek, please note Stephen's question, and I will respond to it as we give our closing remarks. And then Olunga asks and says, good afternoon, a good engagement and very timely. The challenge we still have with this issue is the point where it's the same politicians who are charged with the responsibility of setting rules of the game. I see it the same as the recall clause and the Chapter 6. They will always drag their feet or make it nearly impossible to implement. Absolutely, I agree with you, Olunga. And Derek has also emphasized that very obvious conflict of interest that then makes our politicians or rather our legislature design a system that is obviously doomed or rather designed to fail right from the onset. So I agree with that. So as we close, I'll ask our speakers to make their concluding remarks, and then anything else that they'd like to add. So I see that most of them have dropped from the call. Let me see if Sarah is still here. Sarah has also dropped from the call. So yeah, so let me start with Leo, your final thoughts and closing remarks. In just
Yeah. So just to end, my emphasis is that campaign financing is not the only factor that determines electoral success. And then number two, it's to ensure that law enforcement objectives of punishing criminal activity, which includes loss of public funds and both in public and in the private sector, gangs such as Wash and the rest of these that have emerged, and the rest of those gangs, the criminal gangs that have emerged, should be punished, and as a way of that in the society, because to ensure that they do not get into the political field. So just like the way I started, this is a marketplace with supply side and demand side players, and with a price. So you raise that price, including the general participation in the game, so that as a society we move forward. And this is something that is being studied across the world. So it's a good thing that we are talking about it at present and moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo. Derek, TI, I'd like to hear your response to Stephen and also your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. I think Steve and I need to sit down. Yeah, because even though I agree that money is not everything, but I believe it is very important. And statistically speaking, if you do statistical analysis of the profile of leaders that we have in this country and how they got into office, they did not start small. They were either established businessmen, retired or senior civil servants, or doing private business as professionals, lawyers, accountants. So they were individuals who are associated with money. There are a few examples who do not fit the bill, but they are more or less outliers. The norm is that the more money you have, the more likely you are to get into public office. But we can deliberate that on that later. In terms of the way forward, I think for me, I think judiciary has been a saving grace to a lot of issues that we've had, and the case Marcus talked about was actually filed by TIA Kenya and Katiba Institute, and I am very hopeful that if we engage in strategic litigation well enough, then that will be the first step into Canaan. Thank you.
Great. So thanks a lot. Thanks to all our speakers. I'd like to express a vote of thanks. First to Transparency International for the insightful presentation and for agreeing to participate in this. Thanks a lot to ELOG, who I think have both dropped from the call now, but equally insightful presentation. And Vincent Kimosop, I'd like to thank him sincerely for his time and the presentation. And thanks to my colleague Leo for also his thoughts and participating in this. I also want to thank all of you who are on the call and who've remained here until we've taken an extra 18 minutes of your time. Thank you. We appreciate your presence here. And the reason why we have these dialogues is so that we can, in our own small way, we can be able to have some influence, and hopefully you take this discussion forward in your own circles. So on behalf of the IEA, I thank you all. We will put together all the discussions that we have had here today in a presentation, and it will be uploaded on the IEA's website, and we'll also synthesize this discussion into a brief, which will also be shared online.